Hey everyone, good afternoon and welcome to Lead Your Movement. I'm Angelique Rewers, CEO and founder of The Corporate Agent, where we're the leading experts in helping small business owners to win corporate clients. And this is our weekly show where we talk to entrepreneurs and business leaders all over the world who are using their businesses in order to drive positive change in the world. And today we have a phenomenal guest with us. I know you're going to absolutely love today's episodes. Just a couple of programming notes before we dive into that. First, I want to say if you're not already connected to us on Instagram and YouTube, you definitely want to do that. On YouTube, you can find us under the channel Angelique Rewers, and you can subscribe there, in order to make sure you get notifications each week when the show is posted there. And make sure you're also connected to me on Instagram at Angelique Rewers. Also, you need to know that next week we will not be live here on LinkedIn or YouTube. This show is going on sort of a 2-week special trip, if you will. We have had so much phenomenal feedback over the last 3 months of doing these shows that we have decided to do something very special for the next 2 weeks. We're going to be hosting the Lead Your Movement Challenge. So from September 8th, through September 21st, I'm going to be interviewing over 29 other experts about what you can do to lead your movement. We're really going to talk very brass tacks, very strategic, very inspirational. We're going to deal with mindset. We're going to look at all of it. And it was really inspired by the fact that every single week after we host these episodes, I get dozens of outreaches on LinkedIn and dozens more over email and through Facebook Live and through all of these other channels saying, Angelique, I'm looking at what these people are doing on your show each week, and it's amazing. And I'm so inspired by it. And I wish I was there. I wish I could do that. So we're actually going to do really a 2-week special series that gives you those brass tack strategies and that big strategic thinking that you need to lead your own movement in a very concrete, actionable way. So you can sign up for that challenge at leadyourmovementchallenge.com, leadyourmovementchallenge.com. It's 14 days of just under 2 hours a day. It's going to be absolutely phenomenal. So make sure you join us there so you don't miss out. All right. So our guest today is someone who I had the pleasure of meeting over a year ago in New York City. We were both at the offices of Ernst & Young for a very special meeting that was brought together by the Virgin Unite team for their 100% Human at Work initiative. And I happen to be lucky enough to be seated next to Bob when we first sat down. It was just serendipitous. And he and I had a phenomenal conversation. And I have been a fan of his work and his company and something that he does every single week that's very special that we're going to talk about today. Bob Glazer is the founder and CEO of Acceleration Partners, a global partner marketing agency and the recipient of numerous industry and company culture awards, including Glassdoor's Employees' Choice Awards for 2 years in a row. He's the author of the inspirational newsletter, Friday Forward. He's author of the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller book, Elevate, and the international best-selling book, Performance Partnerships. He's a sought-after speaker by companies and organizations around the world. He's the host of the Elevate podcast. He is a writer for Forbes magazine, and he's also the author of the book that was just published this week, Friday Forward, which was inspired by his weekly newsletter that we're going to be talking about today that has grown to an audience of over 200,000 business leaders in more than 60 countries around the world. So without further ado, Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Angelique. Good to be here. And as you were talking about that meeting in New York, I was thinking, wow, that feels like 5 years ago, at least.
Doesn't it? It does feel like 5 years. I mean, it was a different lifetime, right?
Yeah,
it was a different lifetime. Economically, everything about life has changed. But this is going to be a great conversation. Let me start by asking the question we ask every guest, and that is, what is the movement that you are leading?
I'm trying to lead the movement to help people build their capacity and really kind of live and lead to their full potential.
So what's really interesting when I hear you say that, and I think one of the sort of the themes I want to explore today is so many folks are very black and white when they're thinking about having a business that thrives and provides a valuable service to the world, a strong value proposition to the world, and they want to be a movement maker. They want to inspire change in the world. And you're the CEO of a 40-person plus company that works with clients all over the world that has nothing to do directly with that movement that you're leading. Can you talk a little bit about Acceleration Partners and then the intersection of those two things?
Yeah, because it does create a lot of confusion. We have I think we were 40 people when I started the Note. We're about 170 now.
There you go,
globally.
170 employees. There you go.
So we've had some growth. I don't want to make anyone think we had some major layoff.
Yeah, that's on me, guys. That's on me.
Yeah, I always say I sort of have two jobs, right? My day job is sort of leading the company, and maybe my afternoon and night job is passionate about taking the things that we have figured out here and some of the things that we have done and really sharing those with other people and organizations. And I enjoy doing that. And I think, I'm someone who likes to play with something, figure it out, and then not from an intellectual standpoint, but from a, hey, we've done this standpoint. Hey, this is a way that I think businesses can run better. Because I really think businesses are a huge force for change, and good leadership and good cultures really can both, just deliver much better results for the business, but also just better results for the humans that are working there.
Yeah. So what's really interesting about that is that so many folks want to certainly be that force for inspiration in the world, Bob, but they don't really test what they believe to be true. They don't have the case studies. They haven't done it. And, in our experience, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So whatever we sort of set out thinking is going to be the plan, right? That's a military expression.
Yeah, I like it.
But the idea that you start doing something, you don't really know until you do it. So it sounds like a little bit you use your own company as really the test lab, the test kitchen for what it means to be a strong leader, and you find out what's working, and then you bottle that up, and then you share it with others.
Yeah, I think it's like a little bit of an incubator for me. I mean, I did not want to build a company that was like the other companies that I worked at, and I think so. We set out to do some things and some policies and some systems that were just counter traditional logic, and we dig in and be like, wow, this really works. Like, I wonder if we can get it, because I think a lot of people are following playbooks because that's what they've done before, and it doesn't actually produce better outcomes. So when we figured out some of these things, like including our program on sort of how to transition people in a totally different way, I kind of inherently want to be like, hey, look, this is a better way to do it. I mean, that's just my DNA. But what's interesting is, because people often, they'll be like, oh, well, what do you charge to come in and consult and stuff on this? I'm like, I don't do that. That's not our business. I write about this stuff and otherwise, and they're so confused that we run a marketing agency. But what's interesting, even within the Friday Forward, which we'll talk about, was I would say I can go to an industry conference, and Friday Forward is not about marketing. It's not about partner marketing. It's not about anything, but it has created connection and ecosystem with a lot of people, where I had 10 people come up to me at the party at a big industry conference that night. None of them said, I loved your article on like ways that you can improve partner marketing, right? But 7 or 8 people came up to me and said, that Friday Forward hit me at the right time. I read that really, like 7 or 8 people. Now we're at an industry event, but they're not talking about the industry. And I think, I just think it talks a lot about a little bit the brand of organizations these days and the leadership, and that I think people are making a decision to work, with your company. I mean, there's products and features and set, but then there's what are the values, who are the people. So even though it has nothing to do with our business, it's been tremendously valuable to our business. And conversely, I think it's because I didn't try to mix the two or put in ads. I think people do things for the wrong reasons, versus if you just create real value for people, you'll get value in return.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because the genesis of Friday Forward had absolutely nothing to do with even your thought leadership outside of your company. So take us back to when you first started Friday Forward, what that was, why you did it.
Sure. Yeah, it was an accident. So actually, it was really about me. So I had gone to a pretty intensive leadership training program where I started making a lot of changes. One of the things that was really stressed there was a morning routine and getting up, spending some time quietly reflecting, reading something positive. They handed us a bunch of sample books, some like quote books. It could have been like Chicken Soup for the Soul. I don't think it was, but the stuff was a little like rainbow and unicorny for me, like in terms of reading positive stuff. So a few weeks later, I decided like I was really liking the routine, but I had some quotes and stories and things that I like. So maybe I'd combine the activities. Like I'd write something for my team, kind of a positive, but I always say Friday Forward is pushes you a little bit into discomfort. It is not rainbow and unicorn inspiration. So I started sending it on Fridays. I called it Friday Inspiration. I couldn't do it every day, so I figured I'd do it on Friday mornings on the weekend. Started sending these notes to my team every Friday, picked a new theme, found a quote, found a story. I didn't think anyone was reading them. I didn't think they were paying attention, but I was enjoying it. And it made me think about something. And so I kept sending them. Then after 5 or 6 weeks, I did start to get some comments, people saying, I really enjoyed that. I went and signed up for a race after I read that, or I went and did this. And also they were like, well, I sent it to my husband and he shared it with his company, or I sent it to my dad. And like, it was clear it was going outside the company. And then a couple of weeks later, I was at an event with a bunch of other CEOs and we were talking about best practices. And I said, I have a remote team. I've been sending this note every Friday. I'm getting great responses. You may want to try something like it. And a bunch of them said, oh, well, send it to us. So I sent them the next couple of weeks, and one started his own and has done it for the last 4 years. And the others, like good entrepreneurs, said, this is great. We'll just send this to our team every week. So I was like, wow, maybe it has interest outside. So people were asking me to add it. I couldn't really manage it through BCC. So I switched it to a super basic newsletter system that still looked like a plain text email from me. And I decided I'd throw a couple hundred people on the list that I knew and see how many I could offend, in one outing. And I expected all these unsubscribes or whatever. And I just started getting really nice notes back and I forwarded. And from then someone wrote an article in Inc. that this is the only newsletter I read, and a couple thousand people signed up. And I opened it up, and that was sort of switched the name to Friday Forward. And it kind of just took a life of its own.
So one of the things that I found interesting, because I'm on your Friday Forward after you and I met a little over a year ago in New York City when we could all be together in person. I ended up getting your Friday Forward. I think I had asked you to put me on there, and I started reading it. And one of the first things that I noticed was that it breaks every rule in the book. In terms of, what you send out. I mean, for one thing, it's dense, I would say, not in a bad way, but just, it's not like, if you look at, say, Burson by Deloitte, for example, right? Yeah. You go and you look at Burson and what they send out, it's like a couple of bullet points, something teeny tiny, really short. You just look at what's out there today. Very image heavy, lots of HTML, lots of bullet points, very short, very sort of Instagram, Twitter universe, right? And then you get your Friday Forward, and it's a very sort of thoughtful, it's thoughtful, it's thought provoking, it's contrarian at times. It does push you, I think, out of your comfort zone. It says absolutely nothing about your company. It says nothing. There are no announcements in it.
People are always asking me to market in it. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, and it's completely the opposite of that. So the subscriber list now is over 200,000. How did that happen? Like, how did you get there?
I think like many of these things, it's like a hockey stick. It keeps going for a while. There were some articles. The first book came out. I ended up being very early on the LinkedIn newsletter series and set it up on there and Elevate. And that newsletter has almost 300,000 people on it. So I syndicated
300,000.
Just on LinkedIn. So I syndicated to there and put some other stuff. It was nothing overnight. I mean, it's a lot of, 20, 50, 100 a day. Sometimes when there's a book or an article or, note about it, there'll be a spike, but I really don't see the hockey stick until 2-3 years in. I think I've heard people say there's something about writing, or it just rewards the sort of the long effort, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you write, you put it into the world, you put it into the world, you put it in the world. And if you're looking for the reward, like early on, it doesn't come. And I heard this from James Clear, who has a 700,000 person news list. It just the hockey stick was much later on. I mean, he wrote 2-3 articles a day or 2 articles a day for 4 years before his newsletter list really started to build. But yeah, as you said, I mean, it's funny. You'll find a Friday Forward in a couple of weeks. I'm huge on feedback, but it's actually going to be about the feedback that you shouldn't take. And, because a lot of people are like, oh, can you just provide a summary of this or whatever? And like, no, like it is what it is. It's a story. It automatically sends at 7:00, no matter where people are all around the world. And I just envision like actually in this time of haste and Instagram or whatever, you sit down with your coffee on like a Friday morning. And I know people tell me this and just kind of actually pay attention and read something it's about 4 minutes read. And if we don't have that attention span left, then we're really in trouble.
So I just want to clarify, and you guys, by the way, those of you who are with us live, please put your questions in for Robert, because we're definitely going to take those today. But I just want to, you went very fast over something that I just want everybody to really catch. And that is that people were telling you to take this very sort of thoughtful, thought-provoking piece that was really meant to be a moment of reflection, because it's not really meant to just be entertaining. It's really meant to talk to leaders about something that they should reflect on and actually think about and consider. It's not how-to tips. There's nothing in there of like five steps this week to be a better leader. It's really taking a theme and exploring it and causing you to go inside to think about it. And I love that a few people have come along and said, you really should just summarize this for me. Which
it was one. So I was the title might be feedback of one. So I'm a big believer in feedback, and I write a lot about feedback. And people can write, and I'll say thank you for any criticism and whatever they want to say. But I think you have to be careful of the feedback of one, right? This person was like, well, how about the news thing where you synopsize it, right at the top? And I was like, it's a storytelling. Like, I'm not going to synopsize it. And then someone else this week was like, actually, and I pushed back on her a little bit, because I'm on the feedback. She said, I like getting this, but it's just all about you, and it's way too self-promotional. And I said, well, I was like, there's no promotion in it. Like, can you explain what you mean? She said, well, you always talk about I, you shouldn't use I. And I said, well, I totally appreciate that, but I'm telling first person stories, and I'm talking about recollection and stuff. So I'm going to have a hard time, not using I. And I promoted my book last week, but I've done that now twice in 5 years. So I hope I have a little grace with people, on that, if they read Friday Forward, that they'd like the book. But I actually think some of those feedbacks you have to just throw away and say, look, if I get the same feedback like 100 times from people, then I say, well, clearly, like, I need to change something. But I'm like, if you don't like the format or the style, but 99% of the people do, I'm not going to change it for the one. So I really think in feedback, you got to be careful. We've fallen into this trap as a company because we're so focused on feedback. We want to be open. But I might take the feedback and say, Angelique, thank you very much. Great feedback. We are not going to do that. Like, it's just, that goes against what 99% of the people like here, or we're not opening offices, but I know you want one, but we work remotely. So it's interesting, because a couple of times, most times I say thank you, and there's been some interesting comments that people have made, but a few times it's like, then unsubscribe. I mean, I'm not. You can't be for everyone.
No, you can't. Well, actually, I think it was Cassandra who just said, I love dense and meaty. I'm pretty sure that's called substance. I think that's called substance. And that's exactly what it is. So Stephen is actually asking Robert, can I get on the distribution list for this? So we should have anticipated that question. How can folks get on the Friday Forward?
If you Google Friday Forward, it'll come up pretty easily, or you can go to FridayFWD.com and you can sign up.
Yeah. And I agree with you. You can't, you definitely cannot take every bit of advice. You just mentioned your company culture. I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because it seems to me in the conversations that you and I have had that Friday Forward has both been a reflection of things that you have found to be successful inside your company culture, but it has also helped to reinforce and hold that company culture by sort of bringing back into the discourse of the company the things that need to be held most important. So can you talk a little bit about that, how a Friday, we'll just call it a newsletter, how a Friday newsletter, how a Friday email is really serving as the anchor to what you want to be your company culture, because you've won over 30 awards for company culture. So you are clearly doing something right inside of Acceleration Partners.
Yeah. So one thing I'll say about our culture, we won all these awards. I think we're an absolutely great place to work for a very small subset of people. So to me, what makes a great culture is I think there's some universal principles that we all think about, like paying people well, treating them well, having benefits. When you start getting into the perk area, I think some of those perks actually substitute for good culture in the Silicon Valley kind of world. But to me, a great company is aligned between what it thinks, what it says, and what it does, right? And for us, that's really our core values, which is own it, embrace relationships, and excel and improve. Like that's who we are, that's what we reward, that's how we behave. So we're really on a mission. We only hire about 1.5% of everyone that we interview for the people who really align to those things. And if they align to those things, they'd say, this is an amazing culture, because what they think is what they do is what they say. Now, some people come in and they see those values they're on the wall, but they see those values ingrained and they think they like those values, but they're not really own it. Or they really don't embrace relationships. They'd rather just do it themselves. I think a lot of times they say, oh, this isn't the right team for me. Like I'm a running back and I picked a passing offense, but not that this team sold me on the fact that they pass and I'm a runner. I think that sometimes they thought they were something. So I just, at its core thing, I think a great culture, and I think so many more companies could actually be great cultures with things that we don't think are a good culture if they were just more honest. Like let's pretend a hyper competitive ex-college athlete CEO who runs around saying, we value teamwork, we value this, we value otherwise, when really they value winning. Well, I've got news for them. If you just said, hey, this is a company about competition and we value winning, and most of the bonuses goes to the 80%, and we're in a competitive industry, you would get people who would want to come work and play under that. There are plenty of those people under there. It's when you feed them this other stuff and then they come there and they find out that's not actually what they value that they get really upset. So I always say, like, I think, we for those people who really match up to that, we're a great culture, because I honestly believe that what we think is what we say and what we do. A lot of people don't like what we think or what we say and what we do. And those people, they're other great companies. It's a little like colleges, right? I mean, there's totally different types of colleges for everyone. There's the small liberal arts school. There's the big city school. People might love one of those schools and hate one of the others. I think you can have great company cultures that appeal to totally different people.
Yeah, I think that's it's really, really good advice that's not talked about very often. Most of the conversation these days is about, attracting the best, the brightest, get the best talent, and not talking about getting the right talent for your culture. So I think that's a really good point. One of the things that's been really interesting about Friday Forward is that even though it was really written more from a perspective of first for your team and then beyond that, in terms of getting people to think differently, sharing what's going on, being thought-provoking, it actually has led to business opportunities for you, as have your speaking opportunities that are not not the brass tacks of marketing, affiliate marketing, and things of that nature. And I think that's pretty fascinating. One of the things that we've seen, Bob, over the years when people come in to work with us is that they might do a newsletter, they might send something out to a list because somebody 12 years ago told small business owners that they were supposed to do that, right? And so they took the playbook and they implemented the playbook. And one of the things that we found is so much of that how-to content that everybody churns out week after week is actually really written for the sort of individual contributor level inside of a company, or that sort of, first tier, second tier level manager. It's not the kind of of insight that people at the top are thinking about. It's like down in the weeds. And so they're writing all these consultants and coaches and entrepreneurs out there who think that, content is king. And they're pushing out all this how-to stuff. I mean, it's great if you're an individual contributor who needs to know how to do something. But if you're the CEO of a 200-person, 2,000-person, 200,000-person company, that's not exactly where your brain cells get directed. And can you talk a little bit about the link between really talking about more of these thought-provoking, big ideas that you put out there and how that's actually led to business for your company?
Yeah, I mean, well, think about social media. I remember years ago when all the big companies were jumping into social media, right? And they were, like our Facebook page. And there was I think it was Hellman's, and it was like, love us on Facebook. And I was like, no one wants to like mayonnaise, right? I mean, this is where B2B has like struggled with social media versus when you think about if you want to move up in a company, you want to create content or something that's so compelling that social media becomes the sharing mechanism for it, right? They like your article or they share your article. They don't love mayonnaise or want to be friends with mayonnaise online. So to me, if that content goes in the organization, around the organization, like there's teams of companies using my email as sort of a Friday morning thing or a book club. It transcends those tactical how-to lists. So I'm not saying this is easy to do. It's hard to strike a chord, but even a lot of the content that we wrote during COVID-19 work content was like how our contact could advocate for the channel above them. It was things that could help them advocate for things for the channel with their boss, right? So it was actually designed for them to use to say, look, we're budgeting all wrong. Like, read this article. We're totally budgeting wrong. And here's how we're not looking at it this correctly. So we were really cognizant of how would someone move this up the chain, this content, inside their organization. And I think, look, the tips and tricks are super helpful. But as you said, that tends to deal with a line person. I would think a little bit about, and Friday Forwards is really different. So, but if you're thinking more in the context of the other, because we have a pretty big content marketing organization anyway, I would think about what could make that article really compelling for that person to take to their boss or their boss's boss, or that content, and to get it on their radar.
Such golden advice. I think too, one of the other things, and we have so many good questions. I'm going to have to get to some of these questions that are coming in over here. Yeah. So one of the things that I have to ask you, so first of all, I hope you guys heard what Bob just said, that his content is so compelling that there are companies that are literally taking some of the Friday Forwards and using it in order to drive discussion inside their own organizations. Now, I have had clients, Bob, come to me who've had newsletters that have gone out or articles that have gone out, and their clients have said to them, hey, can we use it? Can we share it in our team? And their first thought, and I'm not kidding, at least a dozen people over the last 10 years have come to me and said, Angelique, how much should I charge them to use my content as like discussion inside their company? And my reaction is always like this, because are you kidding? Like, what are you talking about? Like, let them have that, let them use that, and then suggest that they bring you in to lead an executive roundtable for them about the discussion. Like,
I just got asked by a client to do a keynote speech at their global executive leadership offsite, right?
I mean, right? I mean, that's the kind of
thing. Talk about elevating the channel,
right?
Or understanding what we do. Yeah.
I mean, that's it changes the dynamic of the relationship as well, right? And I think that one of the things we're going to be talking about at The Real Deal is the idea that when you are a mission-driven CEO, when you're a mission-driven CEO, you're a mission-driven small business owner, when you're looking at your marketing tactics, when you're looking at what you're doing to elevate your thought leader platform, you've got to be thinking about the goal all different than these folks who all they care about all day are conversions and click-throughs. It's just a very different game that you're playing. So I just want to look here because I know one person wanted to know a little if you have any strategies for how you interview at your company. You have 170 employees. You're looking for folks who really are interested in working for a culture like yours. What are you guys doing in that interview process to here you go. Eric asked that question. What are you guys doing?
So our interview process is broken up 50% between culture fit and aptitude. We think you have to have a person who's the right culture fit, but even if they're a great culture fit, they need to do the job. So I think we're talking here about the culture side. So we have a list of behavioral-based interview questions that align to each core value. So if anyone's interviewing with the organization, I'll only release one as an example, because look, to me, someone who did their due diligence about it should have, is better off than someone who walks in blind. So one of our core values is excel and improve. So we want people who are always learning, getting better otherwise. So your interviewer might ask you a question about, hey, Angelique, what's the class you took, book you read, something you did around sort of, getting better? The type of people who would do really well in our environment would have multiple answers. The type of people who probably wouldn't do well would be awkward silence for a minute if we're saying, what's the last thing in the last couple of years you tried to get better at? We might ask them about some process or something in their company that they were in charge of improving before. But not only do we have, I thought we were really smart because we had all the questions years ago. I've come to believe that interview is much more science than art, and because there's so much bias, so you really want to codify it like as much as possible. So I remember one of our coaches, I was like, "We're awesome. We have behavioral based questions for everything," and he's like, "How does the interviewer know what a good answer sounds like?" And I was like, "Well, that's a good point." So we actually then below it would say, a 10 answer sounds like this, a 1 answer sounds like this. So what comes out of that is numerical scoring, that then when we get to the review process, everyone should have a equal distribution of their numerical scoring.
Wow. Okay, so that was a writer downer that I'm going to put into practice. I mean, that's so obvious as you said it, but yeah, what should the perfect answer sound like, or the ideal answer for that person who's the right fit for your culture sound like?
Because when we're in that final review, right, this is where it's so subjective. We want to say, well, how is Angelique on, excel and improve? People are like, oh, she was pretty good. It's much better to be like, 3 people said her answers were 9, based on our criteria. Like, now we're getting really specific, because what happens here is that people, they like people in the interview process. They particularly like the charismatic extroverts, and it distracts them from, did that person meet the criteria of the core values, and did they meet the aptitude, whether they liked the person or not? And the worst thing, I was just talking to one of our managing directors around this, is having to deal with an employee you really like who can't do the job at all. That's the hardest. If you don't like them and they can't do the job, it's much easier than if you really like them, but they can't do the job.
That's an excellent point. So Bernadette shared earlier, she mentioned that she is putting out high level content.
Yeah.
She's, this conversation's giving her some inspiration to really stick with that. And I know Bernadette, it's good to see you. And the work she's doing has always been important. I think there's more of more people are paying attention to it now because her focus is around diversity, inclusion, and equity, particularly with the LGBTQ plus community, particularly in companies that have a lot of customer facing type of employees. So hotels and, companies like a Starbucks, where you've got a lot of interaction in that space. And she's been sticking with it, but hasn't quite seen the hockey stick yet. I'm curious, A, what advice you have for her, and B, I'm curious how much of your success you think has come from being willing to kind of push the envelope a little bit in terms of really challenging your readers? Because I do feel challenged by, when I read your email every Friday, I feel challenged as a leader. And sometimes I'm like, damn you, Bob. But I do feel that challenge. Like, how do you know how much is too much? How do you handle that fear of pissing people off? And what advice do you have around that?
Yeah, I think if you're authentic and you upset someone, you want to make sure you upset the right person to upset, right? Someone who you wouldn't have really wanted to deal with anyway if they're upset by that. So I think people have actually sent really nice notes when I've taken some risk, and I try to stay away from politics. It's interesting how people conflate leadership and politics, because if you try to address leadership at all in the world of politics, then they do that. So, but look, you never know which one's going to strike a chord. You kind of have to just keep giving, taking that risk. It could be the right one at the right week. And it really could just, you can't plan for what hits the right people at the right time. And I do think there is a timing thing. So I if you believe in it, I would go after it. I would share it. I think, the more vulnerable you are. And then the formula that I talk about this in my book, Elevate, that was shared with.
Let me share this one with everyone too. You guys, this is like a must read here. Like, I'm not very good at Vanna White, so if I'm covering up the name, I apologize.
So a friend of mine who works very successfully with troubled youth forever, and he's a leader in sort of social services, said that connection equals change equals connection plus challenge. So if you really want change, you have to have connection and you have to have challenge. And sometimes you challenge to connect, and the other times you connect and you earn the right to challenge. So I think people do appreciate that. Bernadette also asked a question about culture fit. I'd like to address that because I have strong feelings around that. Yeah. I think this really goes to the definition. I agree that you're not looking for homogeneity. That's why I think there's a ton of bias in interviewing. That's why we create very structured interviews. We have a panel. We have someone who's disinterested come in to look at the whole process and the score to make sure that people aren't getting overly blind. But I do, everyone we have on our team is very different. But I do believe that we are looking for that those people represent a shared set of values. And I think that is important in a work relationship, in a personal relationship, in families. Like, I just don't think if you don't share values, it becomes very hard. So I think people can have very different, diverse thoughts, backgrounds, feelings, personalities. But to us, when we say culture fit versus add in, I get the semantics of that, but I'm saying someone who lives our core values as a baseline. I just think those are our non-negotiables. Everything else is negotiable.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think one of our big things is our brand promises. And so what is it when you're interacting with us, is the team focused on those brand promises? One of our brand promises is about elevating the conversation. Because when I came into the small business owner space back in 2006, and I left corporate, I started my company in 2006, Bob. And when I left, I didn't know anything about the small business coaching space. All I knew was corporate. I'd worked in nuclear energy. I'd worked in defense. I'd worked in IT consulting. I didn't know the first thing about, Think and Grow Rich. I'd never heard of that damn book. I'd never heard of like Michael Gerber and the E-Myth. Like, none of that existed in my world. And when I first started going to small business owner conferences, I was really shocked by how in the weeds the conversations were. And that we weren't having, for even one-person businesses, more elevated conversations. And it was one of the things that once I really kind of went through the whole scaling up process of we need to have brand promises, that one was for me. And I think as we've tried to say, look, we need to elevate. A lot of who we hire are people who've worked with corporate brands because they understand that elevated. So we don't hire as much from sort of the internet marketing space. We hire from the corporate space in order to reflect that. But I think that's a great point that you made. So your Friday Forward, walk me through the process of taking that weekly email and then turning it into this book, because I think that I'm a huge fan of repurposing, right? And if you guys this book just came out yesterday. Like, we have Bob here. I said to him before we went on the air when we were in the green room, I said, I feel a little bit like Colbert or Conan or something who has the person on right when their book comes out. But Bob and I, it worked out that we could do that. But it came out yesterday. I assume they can get Friday Forward on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, bookshop.org. We're pushing a lot too. It supports local indie bookstores or basically wherever books are sold.
Awesome. And then I'm going to have to check that out myself. So we're not always going to Amazon. Just don't let Amazon hear me say that. So I feel like that my Alexa just reported me for
the books are getting in the way of all the toilet paper they're trying to still get to people during the pandemic.
So true. But how did you take it and turn it into a book? What did that process look like? Because I think if there's one thing that's true about our community, they have a lot of shit that they've written that probably needs.
You actually don't know this. You don't know the story, or it would seem like a setup question. So I'll tell everyone we haven't talked about the story. But I originally wrote the Friday Forward book before Elevate, and it was rejected by all the publishers. Everyone said, "Oh, well, it was my first book," and they said, "Well, all the agents and said the publishers don't like compilations; they don't want to do this." I met an agent who said to me, I love the writing, I love these stories, but there's something behind the stories. You need to sort of tell a story of a book. So I actually went back for a long time, and I was like, all right, what is it about these stories that are impacting people I don't know? What is it that about my life that's changed in the last couple of years? And how are we growing our company and the organization, and what are we doing? And then also, like, all these high achievers, like, what is it about them that I've seen similarly? And I kept going through it and intersecting circles, and it ended up these 4 elements of capacity were the same thing everywhere. They were the playbook I was using. They were how we were developing people at our company, and they were the themes of these stories and the areas in people's life that they were impacting. So what was interesting was I wrote the book, particularly because I think my audience was growing, and kind of like a musician, like you write your best songs like earlier on your first album before you sell your big album. I was like, I have some really good ones that no one's ever going to back and find. So I shelved it. I wrote the other book. And then when Elevate really became successful and people got excited about the capacity building, I was like, you know what? I could go back, I could find those stories, and I could align them all to the elements of capacity. So if they like the framework of capacity building, these are then the stories. So I basically dusted it off, upgraded, went back to my publisher, and I said, 5 years later, I said, I actually think the time for this book is now. I really want to tell these stories, and they agreed. So it's a good lesson in that, timing matters. I don't think it was the right idea 5 years ago for me, and maybe right now with everything that's going on in the world, it's really, we were joking before, like it's even hard for any authors now to get any media, especially a book about positivity when everything anyone talks about is election or COVID or racial injustice stuff, and people are getting exhausted of that stuff. They really, and all social media is just knocking people down, and how can we tear people down? And it takes about 1/10 of the effort to try to lift someone else up.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, if you guys, you really should follow Bob's article. It's obviously under Robert Glazer on Forbes, but his column on Forbes is fantastic. He just wrote a piece on cancel culture and really the dangers of cancel culture. That's, I think, very, very powerful. It's a really great read, just phenomenal stuff coming out. I know that, speaking of it, this being launch week for you with this book, I know you have lots going on. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you that you want to share with our audience about Friday Forward, about Elevate, about your company culture?
Yeah, so I'll just share one thing. I think the number one thing that people ask me about out of Elevate, and they may even further as they read the spiritual capacity stories, is I talk a lot about how core values were sort of an inflection point for me in my life. Being able to identify the core values, sort of name them, and then start to say yes to things and no to things and align them. I pointed people to some resources in Elevate. We actually had sort of built a process over the last couple of years where we take our emerging leaders and help them figure out their personal core values, because we think that they're not going to be great leaders if they don't know themselves. It's not about the company at all. And that process has gotten really efficient in terms of a half day and getting them there. And then I follow up with them 3 and 6 months later. And I just did a 6 month, and people have a pretty strong list of their core values and are starting to see some patterns in their life. So I went and turned that into a course, since I get asked about it a lot. It got a little crazy with the book coming out. So in 2 weeks, that'll be out. If you jump on the site, they can sign up to be on there. But it really will walk you through that process. If you want to be able to know your core values, articulate them, understand the why, I think we've broken that down into a process. It's not I mean, the course will only take you an hour or two, but the process is weeks or months to really like come up with a working list, test it out, figure out where it's a little off. But once you get that, I think everything changes. I also talk about the big three I mentioned it before, like where you work, your vocation, who you choose as a partner, where you live. If these aren't really core value aligned decisions, I think you're set up for some pretty big failure. So I describe core values as like think of like an electric fence. Like most people, we hit the fence and we get electrocuted and we know we violated a core value. It'd be much better to know where those fences are and then where the middle of the road is and not have to do that by feel.
Really interesting. I wish there were sometimes those electrical fences because inertia can be a very strong force. It's one of actually the strongest. If for those of you who study physics, inertia is one of actually the strongest forces on the planet, in the galaxy, right, in the universe we live in. So I think that's a really, really good perspective. Where is the best place? What URL do you want everybody to go to? Like, where is
I've integrated it all to make it easy. I moved everything last year. So if you go to robertglazer.com, if you can just spell my name or Google it, you'll find Friday Forward, the books, the podcast, and the course. So everything's all in one place.
All in one, robertglazer.com. Well, I am so glad that that 100% Human at Work event in New York City last year took place, and that serendipitously, you and I had a chance to connect over a cup of coffee that first morning. I certainly have benefited so much from the insights that I've read each week in Friday Forward. So I appreciate you being contrarian and thought-provoking and full of substance, Bob, full of substance. Thank you so much for being on, and congratulations on the new book.
Thanks for having me. And I look forward to seeing you in person whenever that is allowed again in the world. But hopefully it doesn't feel like another 5 years. Because when you said last year on that event, I was like, wow, that really does feel like it was 5 years ago.
It is definitely aged all of us. I think that's for damn sure. Oh my gosh, what another great conversation. Just a reminder, everybody, we will not be live here next week. Starting next Tuesday, we'll be live with the Lead Your Movement Challenge, which you guys can find at leadyourmovementchallenge.com. Do not miss it. If these kinds of high-level conversations are valuable to you, then imagine doing this with us at a rapid pace for 2 weeks. All right, Bob, thanks so much. Congratulations again. And everybody have a great afternoon.